Okay, so notes for today's tutorial are posted on my blog under at dave.if90.net under KIB204 tutorials and week 6. So the main post I'm interested in is this one, getting your pipe data out of Yahoo Pipes and into a web page, part 2. So this is an extension of the same post title part 1 that we did, where we used the pre-designed badges from Yahoo Pipes and put those into a web page. So this is going to show you a similar process, but instead of having predefined badges that we have only a certain amount of control over, what we're going to do is process the raw data feed from our Yahoo Pipes, and we're going to pick whatever information we want out of that pipe and output that in a web page with complete control. So as I've mentioned previously, this method gives us, while it's a little bit more technically advanced, it gives us more control over exactly how we output the data. So last week we looked a little bit at an introduction to the PHP programming language, okay, which we learnt runs on the web server. So it has to be on the web server for it to run. And we learnt a little bit about the syntax. And so we're going to expand on some of that with some examples of parsing data from Yahoo Pipes. So I've listed a few examples here in my blog post, and most of these have links to them on a page with some accompanying explanation and screenshots and so forth. Now, pretty much all of these examples contain a certain amount of very similar, if not identical, code. So I have actually provided you up here where it says exercise template files with a link to a pre-built PHP file which contains that similar code that you need, and it will make a good base to build any of these examples from. So if I download that and open up the zip file, I find this file index.php. Okay, and if I open this, I can see that it is a PHP file, and it's a normal HTML file with a little bit of CSS and a little bit of PHP. Okay, so you can use this file as a starting point for any examples where you want to pull data out of Yahoo Pipes using PHP. And you're more than welcome to use that when you're building your mashups. So I'm actually going to recreate this from scratch just so I can explain what everything does as I go through it. So I'm just going to create a new PHP file on my local web server. I'll just call this example1.php. And I'm just going to create a basic HTML page to start off with. And I'll just create a heading. PHP and Yahoo Pipes, and I'm just going to make sure that my local web server is running. Okay, yes it is, and I'm going to jump back over to my browser, and for my local web server I just want to type in localhost in the address bar, and then I've created this folder KIB204, and there's my example1.php file. Okay, and there's the heading 1 that I created. Alright, so I know that my file is in the right place and I can access it through my web browser, and it's running on my local web server. Okay, so now we can start actually writing some PHP to process our pipe data. So what I'm going to do is jump back to my blog quickly, and the first example I'm going to do is the one listed here. I'm just going to output a single pipe of predefined Flickr images. And I have a link to view the pipe here. I'm just going to open that up. Okay, and I can see what the pipe looks like in the editing window. Okay, so this is a pipe that we've created previously. It uses the Flickr module to find 50 images of fireworks, and that's all it does. Okay, so very simple. And if I'm to run this pipe, let me just save this again. Okay, if I run this pipe, okay, you'll remember that we get these predefined badges. So I've already looked at that. I'm not going to use these this time, but the way that I'm going to point my PHP file to the data is going to be similar to how I got the badge. So if you remember, I clicked at one point on this Get as Badge link in order to get a code to embed the badge in my web page. This entire line of links actually is links to accessing this pipe data in various different formats. Okay, so I can get it as various different widgets. I can get it as an RSS feed, as a JSON object. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's just a different data format, and we might look into that actually in the coming weeks. And then there's this More Options drop down here with a few other options, including one which says Get as PHP. Now if I click on this link, what it does is actually downloads me a PHP file, and if I open this up, we can see what it looks like. Okay, so this is actually just a big long text string which contains all of the information from this pipe, but it's in a format called a serialized object. And what that means is that it replaces a bunch of characters that might be potentially unsafe to transmit, so things like code which could potentially be executed, replaces those with safe characters, and so we end up having the information interspersed with these other characters. So what we're going to do is take this serialized object and with a couple of lines of PHP, we can transform this into a PHP array. Okay, so we looked at PHP arrays last week. So rather than clicking on that to download it, what I want to do is actually right-click this and copy the link address. Okay, so I want to get the URL to that so that I can put that in my PHP file over here. So I'll close that off there. Okay, so I'm going to write some PHP now, so I'll create my PHP opening and closing tags. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable which is going to hold my request URL. So I'm just going to call that REQ for short, and I'm going to paste, okay, the link that I copied from this get as PHP here. Okay, so if I paste that into my browser, it's going to give me a PHP file containing that serialized data object. Now I'm going to put this within inverted commas because it's a text string. I want PHP to recognize it as a text string, and you'll notice that this URL looks very similar to the one that we used to access the pipes badges. So it contains part of the URL which specifies the ID of the pipe, and we can see that this number here matches up with this number here. Okay, and one difference is that it says here, it tells me render equals PHP. So this is telling Yahoo Pipes the format of the data object that I want this in, and in this case it's PHP tells it to give me a serialized PHP object. Okay, now one thing I do want to do before I continue on is actually pull this ID out of here and save that in its own variable. So I'm going to cut that out of there and create a new variable called pipe ID, and that's going to be equal to the ID of the pipe. Now the reason that I do that is if you want to later on do this example yourself, what I generally suggest is that you, rather than pulling the data from the pipe that's on my account, that you clone the pipe and then pull the data from that cloned pipe on your account. And as soon as you clone the pipe, it's going to give you a new pipe ID. So by pulling this out here, if we want to pull the data from any other pipe, all we have to do is put the new ID for that pipe in here, and we don't have to mess around with this whole URL. Okay, so I still need the pipe ID to be output as part of this URL. Okay, back here where I cut it out, so what I'm going to do is use string concatenation. Okay, if you remember from last week, we used the full stop character, which PHP treats as a concatenation character, which means it joins two strings together. And we're going to output the pipe ID here, and then join it to the end part of the URL. Okay, so essentially the URL is the same, we're just storing the pipe ID in its own variable. So that if we do want to go and pull the data out of a different pipe, all we have to do is go and find its different pipe ID and then paste it over here. Okay. So, what I'm going to do now is, now that we've got the correct URL to request the data from our pipe, what I need to do is call a function which will actually do that and then save the result into a variable for us. So I'm going to create a variable here called PHP serialized. Okay, so this is going to store the serialized object, which we saw before, as that big long string of illegible text. And I'm going to use the function called file underscore get underscore contents. Okay, and this is the function that's not working at the moment on the student server for us. So hopefully that will be fixed and this will work again. But this function essentially lets us pull the contents of any file from any URL into PHP, and we can save the contents of that file as a variable. So for file name here, we're simply going to pass the URL, which I've saved as this request variable, req. Okay, so now we have the contents of our pipe data as a PHP serialized object stored in this variable called PHP serialize. Now the next thing we need to do is actually unserialize that, and what that will do is it will convert that serialized object into a normal PHP array so that we can then process it in the way that we saw we were playing around with arrays last week. So to do that, I want to create another object. I'll call this one PHP array, and I'm going to set that equal to, and I'm going to call a function called unserialize. Okay, and I'm going to pass it the serialized object, which is now stored in this PHP serialized function variable. Sorry. Okay, so that's done. Now I need a way to test that this has actually worked. So what I'm going to do is output the contents of this PHP array to the browser window so that we can see that the data has indeed been retrieved from the request URL using file get contents and then unserialized into a PHP array. So the way I'll do that is I'm going to use a function down here called PrintR. Now PrintR is similar to the echo function which we saw last week. Okay, so echo was the function where we'd say echo something, and that something would be output to the browser window. Now PrintR does the same thing, but PrintR is good for outputting complex objects like arrays because it will format them in a bit nicer way for us. So I'm going to PrintR this PHP array variable, and I've got one more thing that I want to do to this, but I want to show you what it looks like before I do that as well. So I'm going to jump over to the example here and refresh. Okay, and you can see a lot of data has been output there, and that is in fact the entire data contents of that pipe of 50 Flickr images. Now the last thing I'm going to do to this to have it output a bit more neatly is wrap this bit of PHP in HTML PreTags. Now if you've never used HTML PreTags before, essentially what they do is ignore any of the formatting that would already apply to the HTML. So for example, this is all just putting it on one line. What this is going to do is output it more like you would see if you just had a plain text document. So that'll make the most sense if I actually show you. Okay, it looks like this. Okay, so just plain monospace text, and the PrintR function kind of nicely indents this so that we can get to see the structure of this array much more easily. Okay, so this is a much bigger array than the ones that we created manually last week. As I said last week, we wouldn't have to worry about creating arrays because Yahoo Pipes would do that for us, and all we actually need to worry about is how we reference the items that we're interested in within this array. So what you can see is that this is a big long array containing a whole bunch of information. And if you recall from last week, I said that array items can be indexed one of two ways. They can either be indexed based on a number. Okay, so you can see some of these are indexed based on a number. So like this items array, there's item at index 0, item at index 1, item at index 2, okay, and that will continue on up to item at index 49, being that there is 50 items. Okay, so some of these are indexed based on a number, and I also said that you can have arrays that are called associative arrays that are indexed based not on a number but on a text string, and so you can see a whole bunch of these are also indexed that way. Okay, so for example, this title item is indexed based on the string title, description, link, okay, and so on and so forth. Now, what you can also see is that, again, as I mentioned last week, you can have arrays within arrays. So what you find is that with a pipe, you tend to have very heavily nested arrays. Okay, you have arrays inside of other arrays. So the important thing we need to figure out is how we reference a particular item which is inside an array, which is inside another array. But first of all, I think we need to isolate the information that we're actually interested in. Okay, so this top level array has a bunch of information that I'm not particularly interested in. So for example, there's this count item, it says 50, that just tells me how many items there are. Don't really care too much about that. And then there's a value array which contains the title of the pipe, the description of the pipe, a link to the pipe, okay, and all these other sorts of things which I don't really care about. What I'm really interested in is this subarray here called items, which contains each of the items from my pipes feed. So the first thing I want to do is extract that from the overall pipe data. Okay, and the way I'm going to do that is by going, okay, it's inside of this PHP array, and then inside of an array which is indexed with the text string value, and then inside of that there is an item which is indexed with the text string items. Okay, so it's a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully once I've done the example it will make more sense. So what I'm going to do is create a new variable called, let's call this pipe items. Okay, and I'm going to set that to be equal to PHP array. Okay, and if you remember, the way that we reference an item in array is by using these square brackets. And so first off, I want to reference this item here, value. So I'm going to do that by typing in inverted commas value. Okay, and then inside of that, I want to reference this array, which is referenced by the text string items. So each time we have an array within an array, what we do is we add an extra set of these square brackets. Okay, so, and inside of the second set, I'm going to type items. Okay, so hopefully you can see that that's sort of the chain of referencing. So I go PHP array value, and then inside of value I look for items, okay, and then that should then just give me this items array which contains all of the pipe items. Okay, so now instead of outputting the entire PHP array, what I'm going to do is output pipe items. Okay, and there it is. So now I just have the 50 items which pertain to the 50 items in my pipe feed. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, and so on down to item 49. So what we're looking at here now should essentially be the same thing as what we're looking at in the debug section of the edit window of the pipe. Okay, so each one of these is an item. So you could treat this here actually as an array, and as we click on one of these, we go inside that array, and here, for example, we find another array. Okay, and the most important thing I want you to notice is how the names that are output here for the way that the array items are named actually matches up with the names in this debug section here. Okay, so there's, if we take the first pipe item for example and we look inside of that, okay, we can see that the first item inside of that is called y:published. Now if we go back here, alright, we look inside the array and we can see here, again, the first item is called y:published. Now that's an array in itself, so it contains items inside of that. Okay, and we should see that all of these item names are matched up in the debug window as well. So we should have hour, time zone, second, month, month name, and all of the rest. Okay, so here I open up this item here, and there I can see hour, time zone, second, month, month name, and all of the rest. Okay, so once you understand that, the way that you reference the information in the PHP array is essentially the way that you would reference it in this pipe feed, and you realize that they're effectively the same thing. And once we know that this way of referencing items within an array, depending on how deeply nested they are, then we can pretty much extract any bit of information out of here that we want. Now, if you remember the badges always only used certain bits of information. They only really used the title and the description, and maybe they used the image, and maybe they used the geolocation. Okay, but you might get pipe items that have other information that's useful that the badges can't take advantage of. Or with the PHP method, anything you see in here, you can extract and use in any way that you want on your web page. Okay, so let's practice extracting a single item from a single a single component from a single item in this feed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this PrintR code here so that it outputs, but I'm going to make that happen at the bottom, and then I'm going to do the rest of my code so it outputs at the top of the window above it. So what I might do is let's create a div first of all, and I'll give this a class of item. Okay, and what I'll do here is I'll create a heading. Let's just make that an H3, and inside of this heading, let's output the title of, for now, just the first item in that pipe feed. Okay, so if we're just looking at this item here, okay, item 0, then if we want the title, then we just look down and see what it's named, and I can see down here that it's title, sensibly enough, that makes sense. Alright, and if I cross-reference that with the debug window, again, okay, title there, same naming convention. So the way that I would then reference this particular title is to go, okay, within this items array, I want the item at index 0, and then I want the bit of information that's indexed by the text string title. So the way that I do that is I say, first of all, create my PHP tags, and I'm going to echo, and I'll say pipe items. Okay, and first of all, it was item 0, so I'll put 0 in there. Okay, and then once I'm inside of item 0, I want to look for the item with the text string title. So I'll put another set of square brackets, and I'll put title. Okay, and if I was going then further levels deep into even more arrays, then I'd add more square brackets to there, and you'll see me do that in a little bit. Okay, so this now should go, okay, you've got your pipe items, look for index 0, and then look for the title. It should pull out this bit of information, and then because I've written the echo statement, it should output that to the browser window inside of these heading 3 tags, and then also inside of a div with class of item. So I'll go back to my example, I'll hit refresh, okay, and there it is. So I'll inspect that element, okay, and I can see in the code, there's my div. Okay, div with the class of item, there's my heading 3, and there is the title of item 0 within my array inside of the heading 3. Okay, and we can cross-reference to see that it's the same one. Okay, Coldplay concert stage, there's item 0, there's the title, Coldplay concert stage. Okay, we can determine that that has indeed worked. It has got the correct bit of information. Okay, now obviously if I want to go and pull out the next one, so item number 1, then I simply just modify my code to say instead of item 0, get item 1. Okay, there it is. Okay, the title of that one is Beach Erosion. Okay, so what I do like to do though is, in order to keep my code a bit cleaner and easy to read, what I like to do is first extract all of the information that I'm interested in from the pipe up here, and then simply output the variables rather than referencing the arrays down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this slightly, and up here I'm just going to create a variable called title, and I'm going to set that equal to what I've said down here. Okay, and then I'm going to output title. Okay, so effectively the same thing, but it just means that the code down here is a little bit neater and a little bit easier to read. So my process is I pull out the information I'm interested in first, and then I output just that, whatever that variable is holding down here. So I'll switch that back to item 0 for a moment. Okay, and just make sure that that's still working. Okay, there it is. Now, of course, we're going to want to output all of these items, or at least a bunch of them. Now, we could just repeat this code and do it, for index 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, all the way up to 49, and just repeat this block of code 50 times. But that's problematic, number one, because it takes a long time, but more importantly, because we don't necessarily know for any given pipe how many items there are going to be in it. In this case, there's 50, but next time I search, there may only be 5 results, or a different pipe may have 500 results. So we did start to look at last week how we could output all the items in an array using something called a loop structure without having to worry exactly how many items there were. So we can do the same thing here to output using the same block of code all of the items within our feed. So the way that I'm going to do that is to create a for loop. So you may remember from last week that the for loop that we created, and it looks something like this. Okay, so for each variable as, and I'll remove that bit, for each variable as value, and then we had curly brackets, and whatever we put inside these curly brackets got done once each time for every item in an array. Now, we had to change these two things. So the first variable had to reference our array that we wanted to loop over. So in this case, I want to loop over pipe items. Okay, and this value variable here is a name that we temporarily assign to the current value of the item in pipe items that we're looping over. So I'm going to change this to current item. Okay, and now I can refer inside of here to current item instead of pipe item 0, pipe items 1, pipe items 2, and so on and so forth. Now, one thing I'm going to change here is I'm going to, instead of using the curly brackets to define the start and end of the loop, I'm going to write this a slightly different way, which is functionally the same, but it's just a bit easier to read if we have PHP and HTML code interspersed. So what I'm going to do is remove those curly brackets, and instead I'm going to put a colon at the end of the for each statement. And then where I want the for loop to end, I'm going to, inside PHP tags, simply type end for each. Okay, so now my for loop spans from here down to here, and anything in between here is going to be executed once for each item in the array. Okay, now I have to pull this title definition here down inside of the for loop because I want the title variable to be updated each time I'm referring to a different item in the loop. Okay, so I'm going to paste this here. So title, instead of saying title equals pipe item 0 title, what I'm going to say is, well, set title for this particular iteration through the loop to be the current item title. Okay, so this current item, the first time through the loop is going to refer to the item at index 0, second time through the loop is going to refer to index 1, and so on and so forth. So that's how we can get around having to specifically say item 0 or item 1. We can use this variable current item and say whatever the current item is, get me its title, and save that as the variable title. Okay, now if I say this, okay, and this HTML here is still within the for loop. So for each item within each item within the array, it's going to output a div for the class of item, a heading 3, and then the title of that current item. So we should see now 50 titles output at the top of the page. Okay, and there they are. Okay, so that's the title of every item within our pipe. Okay, and what I might do now is just so that we can see each of these delineated a bit better, is to create a short bit of CSS script. So I'm going to add a style tag up here. Okay, and I'm just going to style. So I've got my divs here with a class of item, and let's just say div.item. Let's give all of those a background color of, say, dark gray. Actually, let's make that a bit lighter, and a bit of padding. Okay, and let's give them a margin as well. Okay, so each one of these is now our divs. So again, if we inspect the code here, I can see, alright, there's going to be 50 of these divs with the class of item. Okay, one of these gets output each time that for loop goes around. Okay, and each one is going to have a heading 3, and then the title of the current item at that position in the loop is going to be output, and then the closing div. Okay, and there's going to be 50 of those. Okay, and because they all have the same item class, they all pick up this CSS style, which I've said to apply to any div with a class of item, where they get the background color, the padding, and the margin. Okay, so now to output any other information from this pipe, essentially all we're going to do is, again, reference whatever information it is we want from the pipe. So we've already pulled out the title. Let's now pull out the link. Okay, so each of these items has a attribute called link, alright, which is a link back to the Flickr page containing that image. So why not then just make the title that we've output a clickable link, which when we click it will go back to the original Flickr page. So what I want to do is create another variable here underneath title called link. I'm going to set that equal to current item, and this one is called link. Okay, and if you want to double check that, okay, you can either go back to the debug window on the pipe, or you can go to the PrintR printout here. Okay, and I can see that for each item that there is indeed an array item with a text string index of link. Okay, so now with that link, okay, I could just output it, but it makes more sense to me to actually create an A tag around this title here, and I'll put this on multiple lines just so it's a bit easier to read. So I'm going to create an A with an href of, and here is where I want to output the link. So I'll just close off this tag first and close it off after the end of the title is output. Okay, so remember you can put PHP anywhere you want, including I can output the PHP inside of these inverted commas which define the href attribute of this anchor tag. So that's what I'm going to do, PHP tags, and I'm going to echo the link variable, okay, which I've already extracted from the pipe items link item. Okay, that looks about right. Go back here, refresh. Okay, and now you can see that these are clickable links, and if I click on one of these, okay, it takes me back to the Flickr page for that image. And if I inspect the code again, then I can see there's my anchor tag, the href, and in between the inverted commas, important not to forget those, where I wrote the PHP, it has output the link that has been pulled from that particular pipe item. Okay, and I'll just check that some of these other ones work. Okay, yes, they all work. They all link me back to the page. Alright, and to finish off this example, I'm just going to output one more thing, and that is I want to output the image itself. Now, the image itself is actually referenced in a few different places, and you may find that this is a common thing that they repeatedly reference, but doesn't matter, you can use any one. So there is within this item, there is a array or an object called y:_flickr, and inside of that there is a attribute called img, which has a link, as you can see, to the JPEG version of this image. And if we go back, cross-reference with our PrintR output, okay, here's my pipe item, here's my array inside of that, which has y:_flickr, and inside of that is the item which is indexed by img. So that's the one that we want to look at. So this is actually an extra level deeper than the title or the link that we already extracted. And you can see here that link is actually duplicated within this y:_flickr object as well. Okay, so we could have used either of those, it doesn't matter. But what we're interested in now is extracting this image. So what I'm going to do is it's going to be current item, y:_flickr, and then image. Okay, so I'm going to call this variable ImageSRC for image source, and that's going to be equal to current item, y:_flickr, and inside of y:_flickr there was an attribute called img. Okay, just double check that, y:_flickr, and then img. Okay, so what we should be able to do now is create an image HTML element, and the source we can output. So echo img_src, making sure that it's within the inverted commas for the source attribute, and go back, refresh the page. Okay, there it is. Okay, so again, if we inspect the element, there it is, there's our image tag, and there where we echoed out the image source, that's where it is, and it has indeed output images. And if we want to double check that they're the right images, we can always go and look at the link, okay, and see that that image matches up with that image there. Now, the last thing I'm going to do, just for aesthetic purposes, is modify the CSS a little bit more so that these are laid out in more of a grid rather than just one on top of the other. So let's just say the width can be something like 500, let's go 400 pixels, and the height can be also 400 pixels, and they can all float left. Okay, it's probably much bigger than it needs to be. Okay, there we go. So now we have it laid out in somewhat more of a grid-like fashion. Okay, so that's the end of this first example. So we've yeah, very similar. Yeah. Okay, so the process, just to rehash, is we need the request URL, which we got from going to the pipe and copying the link from this get as PHP link. Okay, and then we just separated out the pipe ID, so it's easy to change that if we want to change the pipe. Then we needed to use this file get contents and send it the request URL so that we got the serialized PHP object. We stored that in PHP serialize. Then we created a variable called PHP array, and in that we stored the result of unserializing the PHP object, so that then became a PHP array that we're used to. Then, because it had some extra information that we weren't particularly interested in, we just extracted the pipe items from PHP array using PHP array value items. Okay, and then we created a for loop to loop through all of the items in the pipe items array. Then we simply cross-referenced the output or the debug window to figure out how to extract the bits of information we were interested in, and we've only done 3. There's of course a lot more. We extract those, and then still within the loop we output some HTML where we echo out the bits of information that we've extracted from the pipe data and saved as variables up here. And then we've closed off the for loop. And then finally we have the PrintR statement here. And once you've finished sort of debugging it, you can just comment out that PrintR statement if you like. And it will disappear, and rather than deleting it, if you want to add it back in again, you just remove those comments. Okay, so that is the first example. What I want to move on to next is an expansion of this example with something that we haven't actually talked much about yet, which is enabling user input. So we have looked at creating a pipe where you can have user input, but we haven't looked at creating a web page that interacts with that pipe. So I'm going to start by opening this link here to the example. Okay, and this contains some screenshots of the code, which I will go over and explain. But what I want first of all is... Okay, so a bunch of these examples I have links to where you can view the PHP, so you can copy and paste that into your own file if you want, as well as the CSS code that I've used, although the CSS for all of these is very simple, and also a link back to the original pipe. So I'm going to click on this and look at the original pipe. Let's close these other ones down. Okay, so you might remember right back in the first week when we started looking at creating pipes, I think I did show you how you could have within the Yahoo Pipes interface user input. So this essentially is expanding on that first example where, again, we've got the Flickr module, but rather than having predefined values for the limit, the search term, and the location, what we've got here is 3 different user input modules. Okay, one's a number input, another one's a text input, and another one's a location input. And these all feed into the text fields on the Flickr module so that they can be defined by the user. So we'll go back, and so when we have input modules in our pipe, okay, remembering that we use the prompt field to determine the text that shows up next to them. Okay, so here, here, and here. And we can then enter our own search terms. So let's go fireworks near Brisbane again. And let's grab 10. Okay, and we run the pipe and it gives us the data in its predefined badges. Okay, but actually embedding these badges has to be sort of predefined. We can't specify the search term using the badges method. So what we want to look at is how we can use PHP to essentially send the pipe information that the user inputs on our web page, which then can be used as input in that pipe and then get that data back from the pipe. So essentially what we've just done, but we want to add to that the ability to send the search term and so on. Okay, so I'll just continue on the example that we already have here. Okay, so the one that we've got here with the Flickr images. And the first thing I'm going to need to have on my web page, okay, if we look at this example here, is going to be some input fields. Now, there's a screenshot here of the code that you need for that, and it uses HTML forms. Now, if you've never used HTML forms, essentially they're HTML tags which, rather than specifying a paragraph or an anchor or a heading, they specify various form fields like these input fields and these buttons and so on. So I'll add that to my code first of all, and I want that to show pretty much right up the top of the page, just underneath the heading. So I'm going to add my form here. And the way that I do that is by having the tag form, opening and closing tags. Now, the opening form tag takes a couple of attributes. The first one is called action. Okay, and we set that equal to the name of a file which we want to process the form data once it's submitted. So we're going to click that search button, and the information that's entered in those text fields is going to be sent somewhere, and it needs to be sent somewhere so that it can be processed. Now, this could be the name of any PHP file, but for this example, we're going to send it to the same file. So we're essentially going to hit the send button, and then it's going to refresh the page, and this same example1.php file is going to do the processing of that data. So in here, I'm just going to write example1.php. Okay, and the second attribute I'm going to put here is called method. Okay, now I won't get too much into the technical details of what method means, but you'll generally see one of two things. You'll either see get or you'll see post. Now, get is usually usually the simplest one to use, and as long as you're not sending sensitive data like passwords and so on, then get is generally the one that you will use. But in another way, it doesn't really matter. But for the sake of this example, I'm going to use get, and I will show you. It makes the transfer of the information a bit more visible, and I'll show you why in a moment. Okay, so form action example1.php and method get, and then inside of the form is where I specify my input fields. And the way I do that is by creating a input tag. Okay, and the input tags take a few attributes as well. There is first of all the type, and I want this one to be a text input. And then another attribute is going to be name, and I'll leave that blank for now, and the other attribute is going to be value, which I'll also leave blank for now. Okay, so I'm going to copy this 2 more times, so I've got one for each of these input fields, just like I have here, a search field, location field and a limit to this many results field. And then as well, I'm going to need one last input field here, which is actually the search button. Okay, so the fourth one is going to be input type equals, in this case it's submit, and the value here, whatever you put in the value for the submit input field, is the text that's going to appear on that button. So if I want it to say search, then I put search in that value field. Okay, now just to show you what this does, so I'll put some value in the value field for this first input type, and then I'll go and refresh this page. Okay, so there's my 3 text inputs and my submit button, and you can see the first input there where it says some value. Obviously this value attribute is if you want to pre-fill that text input with some text. Now in my case I don't want to pre-fill it at all, so I'm just going to leave that blank. What I do want to do is add some text to the left of each of these fields so that it gives the user an indication of what they're meant to type in there. So before input I'm going to say search for, and this one is going to be near location, and this one is going to be limit to this many. Okay, so that first one's obviously going to be my search term field, second one's going to be my location, and the third one's going to be how many I want to limit the search to. Now, I have so far left these name attributes for the input fields blank, and that's because I really want to stress how important it is that you get these names right. Now, if we weren't using Yahoo Pipes, you could call these whatever you want, but it's important that when we're using Yahoo Pipes, okay, as I've shown in these screenshots, and I'll go back to the edit source here, okay, each of these input modules has a field called name. Okay, so there's search, location, and limit. And it's very important that you match up the name that you put in this name attribute, these name attributes here, with the name that you've given to the input module here. So I've tried to highlight that using these screenshots so that you can see that there's the 3 input fields, and the name, search, location, and limit match up exactly with the names on the input modules search, location, and limit. Okay, so now that we know that, I'm going to put search in the first one and location in the second one and limit in the third one. Okay, so we have our form set up now. Alright, but hitting submit is not necessarily going to do anything because we've not written any code to process that data yet. Now, what will happen if, let me just go back here for a moment. Now, let's say I enter in Beach, Brisbane 10. What I want you to notice is what happens when I do hit this search button, what happens to the URL up here. So I notice that the URL just ends in example1.php so far. As soon as I hit search, okay, it refreshes the page, but it adds on to the URL, search equals beach, location equals Brisbane, and limit equals 10. Okay, so that's using the name attribute from each of these inputs and then the value that I've entered within these. And because we've used the method get on this form, then that means that the information is actually transmitted as part of the URL, and it does it like this. Okay, so it has the name of the file, then a question mark, and then it has a series of names, and then equals, and then values, and each of these is separated by an ampersand, okay, the AND character. And you'll notice that that method of transferring data is repeated over and over again. If I, for example, go to, let's say, Wikipedia, alright, and let's say I search for Brisbane, Australia. Okay, bad example. Let's try something else. Okay, so if I go to Google, for example, and I type something in the search field, okay, you can see that a similar thing has happened up here to the URL string. So it sends, along with a whole other bunch of information like the language and all sorts of other stuff, okay, it sends here Q equals Brisbane, okay, Q stands for query, search query, okay, and you can see that each of these is the name of something equals and then a value, and these are all separated by ampersands. Okay, so that is a standardized way of sending data between web pages, one of the standardized ways of doing it, and if you specify the form method as get, then that's the way it's going to do it. Okay, so exactly the same thing here. So what this is doing is sending those, and because I've specified the same file as the action for this form, then it's going to send that, refresh the page, but send it back to that same PHP file. So what we need to do now is somewhere else in this PHP file, we need to process that information. So once the page is reloaded, how do we actually access that information? Well, we do that by, let's create some PHP here. Okay, so in PHP it has certain built-in variable names, and one of those is called $_ and in all capitals get. And this is an array which holds any values that are sent to it using this method here. Okay, and all I have to do to extract this information is match up these names with the index of the get array. So for example, I can save whatever was entered into the search field as get search. And similarly, I can do location get location and limit equals get limit. Okay, and again, these names are matching up with the name attributes that I've specified for those three input fields. Okay, so that's what this series of images is trying to highlight, that the names need to be consistent over here in the form, and also over here when you're accessing them from the global get variable. Okay, so once we've got these, what we need to do then is send that information along to Yahoo Pipes. And so I'll just jump back to this pipe here, and what I want to show you is, if I get rid of these, okay, you can see that Yahoo Pipes already uses this method, okay? It has the name of the file and then the question mark, and then it has something called _ID equals, and then the ID of the pipe. So we can actually send along these bits of information the same way. I can add to the end of this and search equals beach. Alright, and if I enter that in, then you can see beach gets automatically entered there. And if I want to also include location, then I say and location equals Brisbane and limit equals 10. Okay, and there we go. So we already know that we're requesting a URL to get this data here. So all we really need to do is add these things onto the end of that URL, which requests our PHP object. So I'm going to come back down here to where we have that request URL, and I could just tack these onto the end of here, but just to make it a bit neater and to show you another technique, I'm going to add it on a different line, and I'm going to write req dot equals. So dot equals is a combination of the concatenation operator, okay, the operator which joins two strings, and the assign operator. So what this essentially says is whatever I write here, tack it onto the end of what is already stored in the req variable. Okay, so if I want to add onto the end and search equals, and then add on to that the search variable, so I do that, and then if I want to tack onto that again, request.equals and location equals dot location, and then finally request.equals and limit equals dot limit. Okay, so that would be the same as me going like this and going dot and search dot, okay, and so on and so forth. I'm simply just doing that so that this line doesn't get illegibly long. Okay, so to see what that results as, we may as well output the request URL. So let's do that. Let's do that just here. So let's create a paragraph tag, and let's go PHP echo request. And okay, and I should just reset this back from the beginning. Okay, so if we enter nothing in there, then nothing is going to be sent for these values. If I do enter something in here, so let's go again, fireworks, Paris, 50. Okay, there you can see it is. So there's our request URL that we had up until that point. Okay, and then we've got tacked on search equals fireworks and location equals Paris and limit equals 50. Okay, so now one thing I do have to change is I think I'm still sending this information to the old pipe. So what I have to do is grab the pipe ID out of this pipe. Okay, and because we've created a variable which stores just the pipe ID, it's very simple for me to just paste over that and refer to this new pipe. So okay, there we go. So I'll just repeat that again. So I'll go back to the base case scenario. So if I enter nothing in here, it's sending nothing for any of these values, and you'll see that it should match putting nothing in here as well. Okay, and what I'm assuming this is doing is essentially just finding the first X number of images from Flickr that it can find. Okay, so it's not confining it to any search term or any location, it's just going, well, I'll just get the first X number of images from Flickr, and you can see that those are the same images that are showing up here. Okay, so now we do change this, so let's go fireworks, Paris, and let's get 100 again. Okay, we'll hit search. Alright, we can see that the URL that we're sending to Yahoo Pipes does contain the information that we've entered into those text fields, and then you can see without actually changing any of the information that processes the pipe data. Okay, so why should we? It's the pipe data is still the same structure, it's just that it's returning results based on search terms that we're sending it. Okay, it's now giving us back images of the search terms that we entered in our input fields. Okay, so now we could do anything. So we'll go beach. Now let's go Sydney 20. Okay, and like that. Okay, and there's all of our pictures. Alright, and again, the links back to the original page, the embedded images, all that other stuff still works because the format of the Yahoo Pipes feed is consistent. Okay, so this might be a useful example if having the user control search terms or filtering or input for your pipe is beneficial. So something like a shopping mashup where you're searching for particular items, that could be useful, something like that, and I'm sure there's lots of other examples where that could be useful as well. Okay, so that's the end of that example. And as I said, you can find the completed example for that linked off my blog with links to the PHP, CSS, and also a link back to the original pipe. And the last one that I'll show you here is a link to multiple pipe data. Okay, so far we've only output data from a single pipe using PHP. This example here shows you how it outputs both, in this case, if the Flickr one was working, sorry, the Twitter one, it is working, it's just the screen's not wide enough. Okay, so this outputs data from 3 separate pipes, Flickr, YouTube, and Twitter. And essentially all you do is repeat the code block that we did to output one pipe, and you do it again. You change the request URL for the second pipe. Okay, so for example, I'll modify this one to output a second pipe along with this. So I just have to go and find another pipe. So let's go for, okay, so I've got this pipe which searches for YouTube videos of New Year's Eve 2012. Okay, so let's output this one as well as part of this example. So what I might do is, okay, I'll leave the Flickr one with the input text fields, that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to surround this entire section here with a div with an ID of Flickr so that I can separate it from the YouTube pipe. Okay, and close that div off there. Okay, and then I'll create a div to contain my YouTube pipe. Okay, and this one I won't bother with any input searches. I'm just going to output the contents of that pipe, and I'll just show you how essentially you repeat the same process. So I don't care about any of the input fields, but I do still want the pipe ID and the request URL. Okay, so I'm going to copy those two lines down here. Okay, in this case, my pipe ID is this one here for the YouTube pipe. Paste that in there. Okay, the rest of the URL should be the same. I still want to get it as PHP. Then I'm still going to need to get the serialize PHP, unserialize it, and then extract the pipe items. Okay, and I'm still going to want to have a for loop. So I'm going to copy this. Okay, so I'm still going to go through each of the pipe items and I'm going to extract certain things. In this case, all I'm going to extract is the description. It's going to be equal to current item description. And let's just output inside of a div very simply the description that we just extracted. Okay, and I think that should be it. Let's try that again. Okay, and I believe that has worked, but it looks the same because of the styling. So let me just check. Yep, okay, it has indeed worked. Right, let's extract a bit more than just a description. Let's go. So let's create. Okay, I'm just going to put my divs side by side here. So we'll go flickr width. And div YouTube. Okay, so let's ignore the pretty terrible layout for now, but that's all of my Flickr images on the left. Okay, this is all my YouTube items now on the right. Let's just go back and see what else we can extract from this. Okay. Okay, so let's, for example, extract the thumbnail out of media group media thumbnail 0 URL. Okay, so this one's buried quite deep down. And why not have a image source equals that. Okay, and there's the thumbnail, right? You know it's quite huge and it's overshadowing all the description. I don't really have time to pretty that up right now, but you can see that essentially the process is the same. You figure out whatever information you want to extract from the pipe, and then the code that is generating the request URL, getting the serialized PHP, unserializing it, extracting the pipe items, and then creating a for loop. Okay, generally that's the same process that you're going to want to do for any pipe. So to have multiple pipes on a page, my suggestion is simply wrap each pipe in its own div so that you can style them differently, and then just repeat the relevant code using the different pipe ID and using the relevant items that you want to extract from any given pipe. Okay, so that's the last example I'll go through today, other than just to mention the other ones that I have here. So I have some more examples listed here. These are basically ones that I've done based on things that students have requested in the past. So this first one, for example, outputting a random pipe rather than outputting every single item as a list. This one outputs a random item each time you refresh the page. Okay, there's this one, navigate pipe items, which is similar, except that it outputs them in order and provides you next and previous buttons. Again, you can see it's using this same method of sending data by telling it, sending it the index with which to extract the image from the array. There is JavaScript image cycle, which is very similar again, except that it outputs the images and uses a simple JavaScript plugin to create a slideshow. But to be perfectly honest, you're probably better off, if you want something like that, just embedding the gallery badge from an image feed directly. But anyway, that's there if you want it. And there's also an example here of embedding YouTube videos. Okay, so rather than just having the thumbnails and possibly linking back to them, you can embed them directly. And this one shows you how to do that. So essentially, any YouTube video is identified. Okay, just like the pipes have their own ID, YouTube videos have their own ID as well. And you can just use a little bit of PHP code to pull out that ID out of the URL, and then you combine that with the embed code that you get for YouTube anyway, and essentially replace the URL with the one that is generated from your pipe. Okay, so here's an example. These are all embedded YouTube videos.
So my question, what I'm saying is, if someone uploads a new YouTube video, for example, about or something, is that going to change in my?
Yep, that will be updated. Because each time you refresh the page, Yahoo Pipes will redo the YouTube search, and then it will come back here, and you'll take that new information to generate the embed code. So you'll probably want to have a look through this PHP code here. It's very similar to the examples already, except that it's got
What is it in the one? Which one?
it is this embedding YouTube videos link. Yeah, so if you go to that and click on the view PHP, there's just a section here. So I mean, you could essentially just copy and paste this code, and so it's basically grabbing the URL out of the pipe feed, but then it's using this function here, substr, which is short for substring, which basically goes, okay, take that URL and count 31 characters and then take the next 11, and that's always then the ID of the YouTube video, okay, and then it places that in the embed code and outputs it. So you could probably, for your purposes, just copy and paste this code and just replace the pipes ID with your own pipe ID, and it should just work. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, yeah, that should just work if you just replaced the pipe ID. Okay, and just finally, one last thing, because the examples have been really quite simple, I probably haven't shown you too much that it can do that using the badges method could do anyway. So I do have a sort of a finished example of a pipe or a more finished example of a mashup using the PHP method that I've done up. So this one is designed to show information about current and upcoming movies. So I've got a link to it here. This is the... This will load. I'll let that load and I'll show you the pipe. So this is a bit more complex, but I can assure you that the techniques that I've used are exactly the same as what I've showed you today. So the pipe essentially, and this is a bit more of a complex pipe, and we'll probably go through more pipe examples in the coming weeks, but this has sort of pipes within pipes as well. I use the Rotten Tomatoes API to get a listing of current and opening or upcoming movies. Then I loop through each of those, get the movie poster, then search YouTube for the trailer for that movie, and then I get various reviews from Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes and synopsis from IMDb as well, and then ultimately output that all in one big pipe where I rename things so that they're a bit easier to find. And okay, and then that all gets output into an interface that looks like this. Okay, whereby we get the title, which links back to the IMDb page. So I'll put this one, IMDb page, hopefully. There it is. We get the synopsis. We get the poster, and as well as a link to the YouTube trailer, which I have embedded in the page. So rather than just linking externally to it, which is what you'd have to do if you just put a badge of YouTube search results in, okay? Because you can just take the YouTube URL, we can embed the video any way that we like.
I just love that.
And then there's sort of a matrix of critic and audience scores from Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic, which are both review aggregator websites with links back to both of those sites. Okay, so you can review the data, and then as well the consensus, which isn't showing properly here, but that's pulled from also the Rotten Tomatoes site. Okay, so that's using quite a few different sources, and obviously I just spent a little bit more time laying it out, more so than the examples I've shown today, but other than that, it's essentially the exact same processes that I've used showing you today. So if you want to have a look through that example, then the link to it is here. I don't think I've posted the code, but I'll post the code as well, and the link to the pipe is there as well.